Wonderful. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So I would like to say thank you to everybody that has joined us for this conversation. I am so excited to have this conversation with Karen, titled You're an Advocate, Prove It. I've dropped in the chat some resources for folks to check out at their leisure. We're going to go ahead and get started and also leave some time for questions. So as we're discussing, please feel free to drop in the chat. If you have any questions or thoughts or just want to co-sign anything with a +1000, please feel free to do that in the chat. If you'd like for everybody to see it, make sure that in the chat you're selecting all panelists and attendees. If you would just like for Karen not to see it, please select all panelists. And also just wanted to let folks know that, oh, hey, Danny. You're good. No, you are totally good. Just wanted to let folks know that there is a Q&A that is open. So please feel free to also drop any questions. When I open it up for questions, you can drop your questions in there, and they could be for Karen for sure, or Karen and I. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started with a little introduction of Karen. So my guest today is Karen Pesapane Zadravec. Karen is the Associate Director of Digital Fundraising and Data Management. She's also a part of this new rock band called the Data Management Duo with me. Our album is dropping everywhere, February 30th, 2022, so be on the lookout. She's also a part of the White Accountability Caucus, the Partnership 7, and any other organizing group that you can think of. Karen, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today to talk about advocacy as someone who has privilege. So thank you so, so much.
It's honestly my pleasure and an honor, Rachel. So thank you for coming up with this idea and holding the space and being my teacher in so many ways.
Thank you. I love it. I love it. So we're going to dive right into some of these questions. So the first question is a three-parter. So what do you understand advocacy to be? What do you understand allyship to be? And what is the difference between the two for you?
Great question. So I think my understanding of advocacy and allyship, although those words weren't part of my vocabulary at the time, but really began at a young age, because when I was not quite two, my younger sister Alicia was born with Down syndrome, and I don't remember. I was too young to remember, so I just always remember having my sister Alicia in my life. And as I got older and was more aware of what was going on, the concept of advocacy became apparent to me in the way that my mom really conducted her life and how her life changed in that moment. My sisters and I didn't know until much later that my parents were counseled to institutionalize her when she was born, and that she wasn't, couldn't amount to very much, focus on your healthy children. And they did not make that choice. And, for my mother, it was the moment that her life became dedicated to making Alicia's life matter and to make sure that she wasn't left behind. And this was 1980. So, there were protections in the law for Alicia, but not in practice. There wasn't a lot available to support her. And my parents, there wasn't a special education classroom in our local elementary school. And, Alicia went to a private kindergarten classroom an hour away. And so my mother's advocacy led to the first special education classroom in our elementary school. So I went to elementary school with my sister, junior high with my sister, high school with my sister, and other students were able to benefit from that advocacy as well. And I think when I think of like allyship and how that was kind of modeled to me, like those were the loved ones and friends and even strangers who didn't have to be convinced that Alicia's life mattered, who would never use the word retarded in humor or as an insult, or the people that could easily change their ways with just a little bit of help. So I think, I think both can be seen as labels, but more importantly, they should be just a way of life and verbs. And I was thinking of Erica Moritsugu, our former VP, and I remember how her Twitter bio, right? She has a lot she could talk about in her Twitter bio, but it simply says ally is a verb. And I think that just sums it all up right there. It's a choice and it's a behavior. Yeah.
Thank you. I definitely have seen Erica's Twitter bio about ally being a verb. And I think that absolutely hits the nail on the head, because a lot of times we just think of these as puff words that are nice to put in an equity statement. It's like I've been telling folks, after everything happened with George Floyd, I remember all of these organizations, from nonprofits to corporations, dropping these equity statements. And they said these three things: we hear you, we see you, and we're listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being so infuriated, because hearing me and seeing me and listening to me is all fine and dandy. But when are you going to do something? When are you going to actually put something behind this? We see you, we hear you, and we're listening. So absolutely agree with you about advocacy and allyship being verbs, because it's something that you actively should be doing. So thank you so much for that. So our next question is, in the Millennials Mentors and Managers panel held last year, one of the panelists, Olga, exposed to us the idea of advocacy and sponsorship. Now, having worked closely with you, Karen, for 2 years, I would consider you a sponsor as well as an advocate, because I believe you embody both. So how did you decide, as a white woman with a voice and some power in this organization, that you wanted to be an advocate?
Thank you. And so it's an ongoing journey. I want to put that out there. But it started way too late. Like, I'm 42 now, and I, just started this work maybe 3 years ago. So I have a lot to unlearn and change. But I think where it really started for me was understanding that I do have power and privilege in this organization, because I think it would have been very easy for me for most of my tenure here, which is 20 years now, to say that I don't have power here. I don't have privilege here. So it was understanding that I do. And that can be true at the same time that, you're undervalued or experiencing marginalization. All of that can happen at the same time and be true. It doesn't mean I don't have power and privilege, because by virtue of fitting in with the predominant culture, I do have power and privilege. And there's a flip side to that. right? Is that I'm actively working throughout my tenure to align with that predominant culture and continuing to, and fortifying it, and that keeps people out away from the opportunity. Um, so I had to kind of understand that for myself as like a starting point. And then, it came down to deciding what is my role. And I struggled with that for a while. And I think, at first, my role looked a lot like white saviorism. And then, as I continued to educate myself, it kind of finally clicked that my role is to stand in the gap. And so I wouldn't describe my role as being an advocate, being an ally. I describe my role as standing in the gap. And that is a concept that I 100% learned from you, Rachel. It's because you're just so brilliant. And so that's kind of how I look at it. And, I think one of the transformative moments for me along the way is a couple years ago, the staff did a staff-wide reading of Ijoma Olu's So You Want to Talk About Race. And there's a part in that book where she describes this really awful experience that her younger brother with ADHD experienced in school at a really young age. And it kind of hit me in that moment, like, oh my God, Alicia has white privilege. Like I had never, like, this sister of mine who I've only known to face barriers, right? And wrapping my head around this like realization, oh my God, she has white privilege. My family as advocates for her life's work were able to do that from a place of privilege. And, what does it mean if we didn't center Alicia in our advocacy? And are there even, groups and organizations out there that are taking a race equity lens to that work? And so for me, that was it helped to shape my understanding of equity, to kind of have, and I don't know if I'm articulating it well, but it was just transformative for me in that moment. I remember calling my sister Lori and being like, oh my God, I just had this realization.
And that's how it is. Like you have that moment of, oh, this could actually be more. Like I'm very grateful to you for being able to put standing in the gap into practice, because it's definitely one of those things of like, if you're going to talk the talk, then you definitely have to walk the walk. And just hearing back from you what you said, it made me think about something a little differently. And like, allyship is like a starting point. It's like, I agree with you, I stand with you. Then there's advocacy that's like, I agree with you, I stand with you, I want to do something for you. And then there's standing in the gap that encompasses all of that. It goes deeper into say, okay, in these trenches, whoever's in these trenches, I'm with them too. And to expand your just I don't want to say like advocacy based, but to just expand the work that you do as far as making sure that people are treated equitably and they have a safe place to be. Standing in the gap, I think, covers all of those bases. So it's like you might, I don't think you have to go through a 3-step program: allyship, advocacy, standing in the gap. You can just skip right to standing in the gap, and it will cover more than what you think it will. So I think that's beautiful. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm loving it. I'm loving the conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad it came through. So thank you.
So I'm gonna keep us moving on to our next question. So white fragility, white saviorism, and white comfortability are huge hindrances to equity, appropriate advocacy, and advancement. understanding that these are all what I would lovingly call white people problems that stall growth. How have you tackled each issue of white fragility, white saviorism, and white comfortability to become the person who stands in the gap that you are today? And I know you mentioned a little bit about how you started off with white saviorism and you switched your perspective. So I'd like to hear more about how you, whatever things like white fragility, white saviorism, and white comfortability enter into your space, how do you tackle those to become the person that you are standing in the gap?
Oh, that is such a good question. So, God, I'll start with white fragility. There was a time where I just searched for every podcast that Robin DiAngelo was a guest of and listened to them. Because I don't know, just like that's how I was as a student, like just pouring on me. And that every time I hear her talk about white fragility, it just like I was able to relate to it immediately. First of all, like I didn't have to do any mental gymnastics to relate to it. Yeah, that's me. I see that everywhere. I exhibit that behavior. Like it just really resonated with me. But beyond like the way that her work kind of connects you personally to white fragility, she talks to you about what to do about it. So like the work is out there.
Right.
We don't have to figure this out all for ourselves and on our own, right? Like the education is out there, and Robin DiAngelo just happens to be like, you know, when I talk to people who want to do better and know better and grow, if they're a white person, I tell them to start with this podcast. Layla Said's Good Ancestor podcast, in which she interviews Robin DiAngelo, I think is one of the best out there. And then Layla Said also has a book, Me and White Supremacy, which is a workbook, which I have and have not done yet. So for me, it was about, I didn't like the idea of being so naive, being, you know, almost 40 years old and being totally naive to how I benefit from whiteness, how I protect whiteness, how I am contributing to the oppression and marginalization of people of color. And in order to unlearn and do better, I needed, you know, to learn more about white fragility, white saviorism, white comfortability. You know what I mean?
It's a mouthful. It is a mouthful, which is why we need to get rid of it, because it is a mouthful.
Too much. And I realized somewhere along the way how much energy I would spend on defensiveness and like collecting all the facts so I can make an informed decision. Did that really happen? Is that just how the person feels, but not the intention of you know, the action? And I realized that gets in the way. All of that gets in the way of the work. And you start at the place of believing racism is everywhere. It's in everything. Believing that I am racist. And I remember when we started this work, I remember thinking to myself, am I ever going to get to a point where I call myself racist? You know, like, but
I want to pause you real quick right there.
Yeah.
That is powerful. To
Mm,
be that aware and to be cognizant that that time might come
mm.
is incredibly powerful. And that is the first time I've ever heard any white person say, will I get to that point where I'll actually say to myself, you are racist. The things that you do are racist. I don't have words. That is so powerful. But please continue.
Well, and
That's
it's true. And so starting from, I think it advances your starting point, right? So I'm starting from a place where I have all that energy and headspace that I would have spent, like, that's not really what happened. Like, that's,
yeah.
and standing in the gap, right? So then all that energy shifts to how am I going to stand in the gap in this moment? What is my
Yeah.
goal? So the energy shifts to that question. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. Because once you answer the question of it goes through, like, once you get past those stages, you open up more gates to where you can get to
Yes.
the matter. And it makes me think of this um exercise, and it's all about learning, stepping outside of your comfort zone, stepping outside, like learning your learning edges and then hitting your growth zone. And your growth zone is way out there. But in order to get there, you have to step outside of your comfort zone. And then you have to step into your learning edge. And then you can start to move into your growth zone. So it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
to
Yeah. I mean, something Jess Hood, our former colleague, said early on, I think it was at the organization's first kind of offsite session with our first DEI consultants, and there was this section on the wall where you could put up notes, and they called it, like, it was a garden. I forget exactly what, but it was like ideas we don't want to lose, or thoughts we don't want to lose, even though they
yeah.
may not have a place to come up in this session today. And she wrote, "What are we willing to give up?"
Whew.
And again, that's a place where you can do all these mental gymnastics. Like, why I don't have to give up. We need to equalize up, like,
Right.
um,
Right.
and it took me some time to to connect with that. But that, I mean, that is also the hard part of this for white people and people who benefit from whiteness. It's like, we don't want to be told that we're not marginalized, we didn't work hard for what we have, that our success is at the detriment to people of color.
Mm.
We don't want to hear those things, but there is an element of truth to all of it. And it wasn't our choice, right? The system was designed to have that outcome, but it's still our burden, right? It's still our responsibility, whether we like it or not. And so, again, like, get past that gate, get to the other. I love that visualization. You're so visual. I love that visualization. If, like, get through that gate, get to the other side of that gate, and you'll be that much further along.
Oh, I love this. I absolutely love it. And it makes me think what you were saying about how it's still white people's burden, even if it makes me think of back living in Tennessee. And for those of you all who don't know, I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My parents are on the call, so they all know. But just being in Tennessee, where there's a large white population, and just hearing white people say, well, I didn't own slaves. Like, that was not my thing. That's not my problem. It made me think of the conversation that I had with my mother and my sister about the Black responsibility knapsack, because one thing that white people love to do is they like to say, oh, here, let's put the burden of educating us about how we are racist into your knapsack. And it just makes me think about the reverse of that, about because I really took the invisible knapsack from a white woman. I believe her name is Peggy McIntosh. It's called Unpacking the Invisible White Knapsack, where she talks about white privilege and things of that nature, and how it plays into her being able to move within US society just without any issue. But for Black and Brown and Indigenous folks, it's completely different because they don't have that privilege, because they're not seen as the standard. So it's kind of making me think about what the conversation we had about closing the knapsack for Black women and femmes and just people of color in general, and how white people should definitely put theirs on their back.
Yeah.
And carry that. And it's not so much to be like, is like, you need to always like self-flagellate or anything like that. Like, you don't need to keep harming yourself, but you need to recognize that you have this knapsack on your back. So how can you start to unpack it? Oh, Karen, I'm learning so much. Let me stop talking before we just completely go on a whole different level. Thank you so much for that. So this is one of my favorite memories of you. And I get so excited whenever I talk about it, because I was just so starstruck. But one moment that for me really showed me that you were someone that would not only speak up, but also stand in the gap for marginalized individuals was during the budget meeting of 2019. I remember you took the time to speak, and the first thing out of your mouth was your salary, how you came to receive it, and that it helped advance, and that to help advance the pay equity process, you were committed to giving 10 to 15% of your own salary to junior staff, like then the assistants. And that was such a powerful moment for me. I remember feeling such pride, but a big thing that I felt was security. And that to me it was new. So I was kind of like, whoa, but I was also so relieved that I felt that security. And I just always have to give you a round of applause for that moment, because it was badass. I don't think there's anything else I can say about it other than it being badass. So I'll get to the question. How can one in a position of privilege and power stand in the gap for others? So you already told us what standing in the gap kind of means to you, but if you have any other thoughts on how you would like to add to how standing in the gap means to you, please do that. But also, how can people in privilege and power, like what would you tell somebody who's in privilege and power, like what they can do to stand in the gap?
Oh goodness. So that moment that you recall, I think is also like, yeah, I think that was a moment where, if I were to say the first time I practiced standing in the gap, it was in that moment. And it was all like coming to me in the moment, because we were, it was, I think there was like, we had a piece of paper, and it was the pay philosophy at the time, not the pay policy, but just kind of like a documentation of where the pay is at the organization at that point in time.
Right.
And I remember looking at it and being like, okay, I've been here a long time. I think I've had 2 raises. I've never asked for one. They've just been given to me. And because of my tenure, I at the time was making just under 100,000, like 99,825 or something like that. And so with the next COLA, I would go over 100, and it would just keep going from there. And it was the part that like everything kind of started to click for me. Like, tenure is why I've moved from, where I started to where I am for the most part. Who has the privilege of tenure? History at this organization, history shows it's people just like me. So if I look at this pay philosophy, I see that it works really well for me. And that's a red flag, right? Like if I see a policy, and I know it wasn't meant to be a policy, but a culture, whatever, and it works out really well for me, then that means there's no mental gymnastics here. It means it doesn't work for people of color.
Whew.
And that came to me in that moment. And going back to Jess, what are we willing to give up? And one of the articles you shared in advance of this meeting where they say risk your unearned benefits to benefit others. Like for me, not wanting to play with the structure anymore, being complicit in the structure anymore, that means not getting a pay raise every year. That's what it means for me. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm saying that's what it means for me. And so I've, through my own monthly giving, keeping my salary at basically the 99 825. So it is not giving back 10 to 15%. I want full accountability on that. I've given back 3% last fiscal year, and I'll be giving back 6% this fiscal year.
Wow.
But that is how, for me, that's a way that I said, this is how I'm not going, until there is less of a gap,
Right.
like in salaries, and more transparency and actual policy and opportunities for people to advance and know how to advance. I'm not going to benefit from the tenure that keeps giving me more money every year. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it's even more cool to hear that that was the first moment for you standing in the gap, because I know personally that is not the first time you stood in the gap for me, or just in general. So hear you say that was very interesting. But I know that, and I was telling you this before we even started, but like my name would come up in rooms and you would be in those rooms and you would say, no, we're not gonna do that to them. We are absolutely going to have this conversation to make sure that they are protected, they're well taken care of. And I am so grateful for you to start from there, and then to see it culminate in that meeting, and also just like being in organizing spaces with you. Like that was part of those questions, were things that we came up with in the partnership 7. And I know we all had our assigned questions and things like that. And watching you kind of go off script was like, I just remember sitting next to you being like, and you weren't even standing up, but I felt like you were standing up, and I was just like, this is phenomenal. It knocked my socks off. So I want to
say one more thing about that.
Yes, please do.
So, and I cannot take credit for this. I learned this from Amaya, who's so brilliant at speaking the truth. But why could I do that in that moment, Rachel? And it's because you did it before me. You stood up in the moment. You put yourself on the line. And you continue to do it over and over again because you can't not do it. Like, this is your life's work. This is your calling. And I think for all of us to be able to do this work with you is a gift that we have to make the most of. But the reason I could speak out then is because you made it. You were the first to do it. You and Dawn, and I think Katie Martin, when a former VP, when she was here, started to make that culture change. And so you kind of created the gap that we could stand in.
I can say nothing but thanks. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm just going to say thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, this has been such a dope conversation. I do have one last question and then
Sure.
we will open it up for questions. So everybody, please feel free if you would like to drop questions in the chat or the Q&A is open. We will be checking through that. But my last question, Karen, is more of a open platform for you to say whatever you would like. So if you could speak up and out about one thing, and you, I mean, if you want to speak up and out about more, that's okay. I know we have like some time and I want to make sure people have time to ask questions. But if you could speak up and out about one thing, what would it be?
So I do think it goes back to my roots and my family, and knowing that developmental disability, mental illness like ADHD, anxiety, depression doesn't just happen to white people. And there's a lot of I personally could not find an organization that is there for people of color with Down syndrome. It probably exists. I just haven't found it. And why haven't I found it? Because it's probably grossly under-resourced and, you know, doesn't get the attention it deserves, but it's probably doing fantastic work, right? But it seems to me like the racial equity lens, there's a lot of opportunity to apply that to advocacy around developmental disability and mental illness. And I mean specifically, like, you know, for me, it would be people with Down syndrome, because I know what it meant to be a lifelong advocate for my sister, what is needed to be an advocate for a person of color with Down syndrome. What is their life like? What is it like to be the parent or guardian or family? And I just feel like there's a lot missing there.
Wow. I just did a quick search because, as I tell everybody, Google doesn't judge. They may collect your information, but they don't judge. So if you ever have a question, always ask Google. The National Black Disability Coalition. I just dropped their. Oops, I didn't drop it in the right place. But I've just dropped the link to their website. I think that is absolutely something. It goes into another discussion that I want to have, and I'm more than likely will have in the future, about intersectionality and how things kind of compound, and how we can navigate through our different identities, and understanding that, like, if we just say that, oh, this is just for cis het Black people who are able-bodied, who are married with kids, like got 2.5 kids and have a median income of whatever, we're completely leaving out the best of us, which could be Black trans people, Black trans disabled people, Black non-binary people, Black queer people, and I'm using Black people because I'm Black. But you know, when we just say that this specific group that meets this criteria is who we're going to advocate for, and the reason that we're advocating for them is because that one marginalized identity of being Black or you know, being queer is the main thing that we focus on, and we don't collect and bring in everybody, then we're doing everybody a disservice. So I want to say thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this conversation. So I'm gonna give a moment to just, yay.
Thank you, Rachel.
So the chat is going up. We have so many lovely things in here. Thank you all so much for jumping in the chat. Cincy says plus to intersectionality. Lauren says, I think most of these orgs are community-based, so maybe not even getting any funding at all. So we're getting a lot of resources. So I will definitely save the chat so we can check out all of these organizations. There is a question in the Q&A box. Thank you so much, Travis. I do want to look at a couple of other comments in the chat. Jade said, I wish the white people from my social work program could attend this. They don't want to give up anything and are super defensive when you even mention that they have privilege, sad face. Well, luckily for you, Jade, this will be recorded and I will share it with you. So please feel free to share it with them. You can just drop it like, here you go, you're welcome. Somebody said, we also need to call out everywhere that intention is really barely relevant when it comes to racism. Totally, absolutely agree. And someone else said, it takes great strength to look in the mirror, especially when it's the funhouse mirror of this culture's distortions, i.e. racism and all its convoluted images, warping the image of who you really are. So there's so much great stuff. Thank y'all so much. Y'all are dropping so many dope things into the chat. So we are gonna go and get into the questions. I will absolutely, y'all, podcast will be coming soon. I just have to get better at being tech savvy, but thank you all so much. Thank you all to everybody who came to this event. I know it wasn't a super scheduled event, but I'm so grateful to you all for coming out and dropping questions. So we'll take our first question in the Q&A. So this is from Cincy. How do you reconcile the embedded white privilege of payment recognizing tenure with the overall principle of tenure being recognized in payment and other benefits, which is such a fundamental tenet of labor rights? So I'll read it again. How do you reconcile the embedded white privilege of payment recognizing tenure with the overall principle of tenure being recognized in payment and other benefits, which is such a fundamental tenet of labor rights?
Excellent question. I cannot honestly say to you that tension factored in for me, and that's why I don't want to say this is what we all need to do. And for me, it's that there is an inequitable system that I am a part of by virtue of working here for 20 years, by virtue of fitting into the predominant culture. And through that lens, and until there is a fair, transparent, equitable pay philosophy and practice, my choice is to not continue to benefit from tenure with regard to my salary.
And that absolutely makes sense. Sissy added a little bit of context. She says, asking this question as someone who worked for and was an elected official of her union. I absolutely agree. I mean, I am not someone who has tenure. I am definitely a non-binary queer Black millennial who is, and if you don't know much about millennials, it's like, if this job isn't working, I'm a skedaddle. And I actually thinking in my life of a lot of Black people that I know and a lot of white people that I know, I don't know as many Black people who have tenure or who have stayed in one position for a super long time. I mean, excluding my mother, she was the public defender for Hamilton County for over 25 years, and that was an elected position. So that's one example, but many other people, it's 2 years, 3 years at a spot, especially if they're around my age, is we're good, we're gonna bounce, we're moving on to the next place. So I've never even had the opportunity to even contemplate having tenure. But I remember when we saw the pay philosophy document, I remember thinking the way that this is worded, I don't think that I'll ever have tenure in this organization. Right. It seems to be reserved for only white people. So that was just that, to see that question about tenure just got me thinking about how would that affect me, because I feel, and I was telling you this earlier, white supremacy is global, is very global, and everybody, they don't have to be white, can participate in white supremacy by upholding certain systems. So that question actually now has me thinking about, well, do I want tenure? Is tenure actually something that is meant to keep certain people in positions of power and others like not in positions of power? And it's got my gears running. So I want to say thank you so much, Cincy, for that question, and thank you so much, Karen, for your answer. Please, we have plenty of time for more questions, so please feel free to either drop in the Q&A or drop it in the chat. But that was really, really tight. And also, y'all, please feel free to keep dropping organizations that you think that Karen and I should know about. I'm interested in knowing too, so I'm gonna just throw myself in there. Since he says tenure, by the way, in this context, is not like in the academic world, just length of time in the organization.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. And now it's got me thinking even more. Yeah. So I'm loving the questions that are getting me to thinking. So Lauren has a question for you, Karen. She says, Karen, what? She says, what is the one thing that you wish more white people in your life would do regarding standing in the gap?
Oh my gosh. I want to hear your answer to that question, Lauren. I missed Lauren in the list of people I named earlier who were like on the forefront of culture change here. My God, Lauren. One thing that I wish more white people in your life would do, Ray, standing in the gap. That's a great question. I mean, I think I would like to see less defensiveness and kind of those mental gymnastics, because I think that is such a barrier to just, because that gets you through the gate to saying, okay, what do I need to do to stand in the gap right here? Like, how many times do we have to resurface trauma because it still hasn't been repaired? And where does that burden fall? Yeah, sorry. I was looking at Cincy. Yeah. So I think it's just choosing not to do those mental gymnastics anymore and saying, what is my role in this moment? That's a bad answer.
No, it's not at all a bad answer, Karen. I mean, my main answer was going to be like, be more like Karen. Please be more like Karen. Oh, Lauren says that she would like to hear my answer to this too, only if I want to be more like Karen. That would absolutely be my answer. I've only been at this organization for about 2 years in a couple months. And working with Karen, not just as somebody who can help guide me and help increase like my skills as it pertains to data management and data analytics, but also being able to go to Karen and say, I don't know what these white people think they're doing in this organization, but it has to stop. And just having Karen listen to me and not try to say, well, I mean, is it really as bad as you think it is? Or like, are you sure? Because, you kind of are intimidating. Like, not having that to have to jump over and be like, look, I am literally a person who is operating on survival instinct in a place that has done nothing but keep their foot on my neck. It is such a breath of fresh air. Now I'm getting on my activist box. Let me
go.
It is absolutely wonderful and such a relief as somebody who identifies as I do, to be with somebody, to be in community with somebody who does have privilege and power and says, I am making this conscious choice to not go through mental gymnastics. I am going to believe you when you tell me that you've been harmed. You know what? Do you need my office to create some resistance strategies? What do you want to do? Like, my space is open to you. So to all the white people on this call, I would absolutely say, y'all need to talk to Karen more. you should absolutely sit down with Karen and see how, this conversation has shown how Karen went from point A to point B, and it's still an ongoing journey. Karen hasn't combusted. Karen hasn't burst into flames. None of that's happened. But instead, what's happened is Karen has also helped with pushing forward this work. And that is something that I think needs to be acknowledged, in so much that if Karen can do it, you can do it too. And it's free 99. It is absolutely free 99. And people such as myself will be absolutely grateful. So in short, be more like Karen.
Oh my God.
Oh, wow. Thank you all so much for this conversation. We could go ahead and take one more question. If anybody has any questions, feel free again to drop it in the chat, drop it in the Q&A. But while y'all are doing that, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to you all for showing up and sticking it out for this conversation. Thank you so much to you, Karen, for joining me in this conversation. I was trying to take notes, but I was getting too excited, so I didn't get to take as many, but I know that we'll have further conversations, so I'm not too but I wanted to thank you all so very much for showing up. This is very important work, period, but also a great conversation. So thank you all. It doesn't look like there are any other questions. So I will say that the recording for this will be available a little bit later. So please be on the lookout. I will try to email that around to all staff, especially for those who were unable to make it. But I just wanted to say again, thank y'all. This has been wonderful. Karen, thank you. I've learned so much. I've had such a great time. And I want to do this again. I want us to do this again. So we're going to do it again. Thank you all so very much. Y'all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.